When you think about neighborhoods, you imagine peace, friendly neighbors, maybe a barbecue on the weekends. But what if the very people meant to keep order turned against you, stripped away your rights, and pushed you so far that you had no choice but to fight back in the most shocking way possible? That's exactly what happened to me. And if you want to hear the wildest, most unbelievable HOA story you'll ever come across, make sure you stick around to the very end and don't forget to subscribe to Sham Stories so you never miss another jaw-dropping tale. Because this one starts with a road and ends with every single car in the HOA vanishing into thin air. The first time I realized something was wrong was when I came home one late afternoon from work. I lived at the very end of a cul-de-sac that connected directly to a small gravel road leading out to the main highway. That gravel road was technically mine, part of the original land survey when the property was divided up decades ago. My father had told me about it when I inherited the property. It was small, about a quarter-mile stretch that looked like any other road, but the deed said clear as day it was private. It was mine, and it was my responsibility to maintain it. And I did. I kept the gravel filled, trimmed the weeds, and even paid for grading once a year. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a sense of independence. That strip of land was mine and mine alone. So when I got home that day and saw new signs nailed into posts at the end of the gravel road reading private HOA property, residents only, HOA access required, my stomach dropped. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe they put the signs in the wrong place. But then I saw fresh tire tracks, clearly from trucks that had just dumped loads of gravel and spread it with a grader. My road, my land, had been resurfaced without my permission and branded as belonging to the HOA. I stormed over to the nearest board member's house. A man named Richard, who wore his polo shirts like a uniform and liked to remind everyone he was the treasurer, and demanded an explanation. He stood in his driveway sipping an iced tea, smug as ever, and told me flatly we voted to absorb that road. It made sense for the community, and now it's ours. You should be thanking us for maintaining it for you. I pulled out my deed, waving it in front of his face, but he didn't flinch. He said, "That deed is outdated. We had a survey done, and besides, the board has authority to act in the community's best interest. You can keep yelling, but the road is HOA property now." I left furious, my hands shaking, because I knew what they had done was not just wrong. It was illegal, but Richard wasn't the type to back down. The HOA wasn't just one man. It was a pack. They moved as one. And when one of them set their sights on you, the rest followed. Within days, I started getting violation letters. In my mailbox, notices claiming my lawn was too long, my fence was not community standard, even that my shed was improperly painted. All of it nonsense, and all of it conveniently arriving right after I confronted Richard about the road. I called the county clerk's office, pulled the official maps, and there it was, plain as day. The gravel road was marked as my property, not HOA common space, not public land, but mine. I thought that would be the end of it. But when I brought the documents to the next HOA meeting, the board laughed in my face. Karen, the board president, who had that clipped voice like a substitute teacher, told me, "You can wave paper around all you like. But the board has voted, and our decision stands. That road belongs to the community now." I realized then this wasn't about paperwork or logic. This was about power. They had decided to take my road, and they would keep pressing until I either gave up or went broke fighting them. Neighbors avoided me. Some whispered apologies. Others crossed the street when they saw me. It was like I had been marked as an outcast, but I wasn't about to roll over. The final straw came 2 weeks later when I saw Richard standing at the end of the road with a tow truck, Karen beside him, clipboard in hand. They were writing down license plates and pointing at my driveway. They weren't just claiming the road, they were now trying to dictate how I could use my own property. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, deed in one hand, HOA notices in the other, and I made a decision. If they wanted to play dirty, I would. Show them what dirty really looked like, and I wasn't going to fight them with endless paperwork or phone calls. No, I was going to hit them where it hurt the most, their precious cars. The next morning I began my plan. I researched every inch of property law. every loophole about private access roads, and what I discovered made me grin for the first time. In weeks, you see, as the sole legal owner of the gravel road, I had the right to control access. I had the right to gate it, block it, even tow cars if they trespassed without my consent. The HOA had no authority whatsoever. They had taken what wasn't theirs, and I was going to make sure they paid for it. The board thought they had cornered me. But what they didn't know was that by claiming the road, they had walked right into a trap of their own making, and I was about to spring it in a way that would leave the entire neighborhood stunned. The fallout from towing the HOA board's cars was more explosive than I could have imagined. By the next morning, Karen had sent out a mass email to the entire community calling me a dangerous vigilante and claiming that I had illegally stolen vehicles. She warned that anyone who supported me would be considered complicit in criminal activity and hinted that fines could be issued. But the cracks in her power were already showing because instead of rallying behind her, many of the neighbors were furious at the board for getting themselves into this mess in the first place. Several people forwarded me her email with sarcastic comments like, "So proud of our fearless leader," or "Remind me again whose road it is." And when I stepped outside to mow my lawn that afternoon, 3 different neighbors came by just to pat me on the shoulder and tell me they wished they had the guts to do what I had done. It was the first time since the fight over the road started that I felt like maybe I wasn't alone. Still, I knew the HOA board wasn't going to lick their wounds quietly. Richard was the first to make a move. He came stomping up my driveway with a thick envelope in his hand, tossing it down at my feet like he was serving me some royal decree. Inside was a stack of papers full of HOA citations, 10 in total, everything. From improper edging of my lawn to unauthorized paint color on my shed, it was laughable. All of them complete nonsense. I just shook my head and told him, "You can write me up all you want, but those notices mean nothing off HOA property, and newsflash, Richard, my land isn't yours." He sputtered and threatened court, but I slammed the door in his face. Later that night, I heard Karen outside ranting to a group of board members in her driveway about how they needed to make an example of him or risk losing control of the whole community. It was clear they were desperate, because losing face in front of the neighbors was their greatest fear, and I had embarrassed them in a way they couldn't spin away. A few days later, as expected, I got a letter from a law firm claiming I had unlawfully removed HOA assets and demanding immediate restitution plus a $10,000 fine. My heart skipped a beat when I first read it, but once I calmed down and took it to my lawyer, she laughed out loud and said, "This isn't even worth the paper it's printed on. They don't own those cars, the individual board members do. And you had full legal right to tow them. They're trying to scare you." She drafted a response letter that basically told them to back off or face countersuits. I mailed it off and waited, knowing this battle was only heating up. Sure enough, the next HOA meeting was standing room only. Word had spread about the towing incident, and nearly the entire neighborhood showed up, curious to see what would happen. I took a seat in the back while Karen pounded her gavel and tried to restore order. She launched into a furious speech about rogue homeowners and safety concerns, her face turning redder with every word when she finally pointed to me and said, "This man has endangered us all and must be punished." The room erupted, but not the way she wanted. People started shouting back, demanding to know why the board had taken my road in the first place, asking if their HOA dues had been spent on that illegal survey. And one bold neighbor even stood up and said, "Maybe he should be on the board instead of you. At least he knows how to stand up for himself." Karen's jaw dropped. Richard tried to regain control, but the meeting dissolved into chaos. It was the first real crack in their armor. The first time I saw the neighborhood openly defy them, and it lit a fire in me. I realized I had more support than I thought, and that scared the board more than anything. After the meeting, Karen cornered me in the parking lot, her voice low and trembling with rage. "You think you've won, but you haven't. We will bury you in fines, in lawsuits, in complaints. You won't last here. You'll have no choice but to sell and leave." I stared her dead in the eye and replied, "Funny. I was thinking the same thing about you," and walked away, leaving her seething. The days that followed were tense. Board members drove past my house slowly, glaring, trying to intimidate me. Anonymous letters showed up in my mailbox with threats like, "You'll regret this and we run this neighborhood." But I wasn't backing down. I reinforced my signs, kept Hank on speed dial, and waited, because I knew it was only a matter of time before they tried again. And when they did, I would be ready. What they didn't realize was that every move they made only gave me more ammunition, because every violation notice, every threat, every fake lawsuit was another piece of evidence showing their abuse of power, and I was quietly gathering it all into a file thicker than a phone book. I didn't know exactly how this war would end. I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't just fighting for my road anymore. I was fighting to bring the entire board down. And once I started, there would be no stopping me. The weeks that followed turned into a quiet but bitter standoff, with Karen and her board escalating their tactics and me digging in deeper. They stopped pretending to be subtle and began a campaign of harassment that was as childish as it was. Infuriating, Richard reported me to the city code inspector 3 times in 1 week, claiming I had built illegal structures on my property. Each time the inspector came out, took one look around and shrugged, saying there was nothing wrong. And each time Richard stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, smirking like he thought he'd finally caught me. One evening, I noticed 2 board members parked just down the street, watching my house like they were waiting for me to slip up. I waved at them and they sped off, but I could feel the paranoia setting in. My wife kept asking if this was worth it, if fighting them was worth all the stress, but I told her that giving in would be worse, because once you let bullies take an inch, they'll take the whole yard. Still, the tension wore on me, and when another letter arrived from the HOA, threatening to put a lien on my house if I didn't pay fines, I decided it was time to stop playing defense and hit them where it hurt. I called a friend of mine who worked as a surveyor and asked him to recheck the boundary lines that the HOA had manipulated in their attempt to claim my road. He came out with his equipment, and within an hour confirmed exactly what I already knew. My property extended well beyond the line the HOA had drawn, and the documents they had filed were fraudulent. He gave me the certified report, and I tucked it into my growing folder of evidence, but I wasn't done. I reached out to the county clerk's office and pulled every HOA filing for the past 10 years. It took days of digging, but what I found nearly made my jaw hit the floor. Misused funds. Forged signatures on petitions and expenses paid out to companies that didn't even exist. It was corruption laid bare, and I suddenly realized that the fight over my road was just a symptom of a much larger disease. Karen and her board had been running this HOA like their personal fiefdom for years, bleeding homeowners dry while enriching themselves. Now I had the proof. I wasn't sure yet how I would use it, but I knew that if I played this right, I could do more than just protect my property. I could dismantle their entire empire. So, I began laying groundwork carefully and quietly. Starting with my neighbors, I started showing them pieces of the evidence I had gathered. Nothing too overwhelming, just enough to open their eyes. One by one, they began to see the truth. People who had once muttered about me being that stubborn guy at the end of the road were now stopping by to ask how they could help. Some shared their own stories of harassment, bogus fines, threats, intimidation, and I added every one of those accounts to my growing arsenal. The board must have sensed something was shifting, because they doubled down on their aggression. Karen herself marched up to my porch one afternoon waving a clipboard, announcing that she was issuing me a final demand to pay thousands of dollars in fines or face foreclosure. I couldn't help but laugh, because at that exact moment, I had just gotten off the phone with a local news reporter who was very interested in a story about HOA corruption. "You do what you have to do," I told her calmly. "But you might want to check the 6 o'clock news this week before you try anything." Her smug expression flickered into uncertainty, and I closed the door on her mid-sentence 2 days later. That reporter ran the first segment of what would become a 3-part expose. She focused on my case, interviewing me about the road seizure and the retaliatory fines. But she also hinted at the deeper corruption, flashing copies of the fraudulent filings on screen. The neighborhood exploded. People were calling me nonstop, some thanking me, others demanding to know how long this had been going on, and for the first time, the power dynamic shifted hard. The board scrambled to hold a special meeting to address the false allegations. But hardly anyone showed up. Instead, most of the neighbors were gathered in driveways, watching the second part of the expose live, which detailed how the board had funneled thousands of dollars of HOA dues into fake companies that traced back to Karen's relatives. When the reporter cornered Karen outside her home for comment, she slammed the door in their face. The next morning, Richard tried to act tough, driving by my house slowly with a smirk. But the smirk was gone by that evening when county investigators showed up at the HOA office and carried out boxes of documents. Word spread fast. And suddenly, the people who once cowered under the HOA's thumb were whispering openly about voting them out. The board's cars stopped showing up on my road. Their smug patrols vanished. And though I knew they weren't defeated yet, I also knew they were on the ropes. It was a strange mix of relief and adrenaline, because for the first time in months, I felt like we had a real chance to win, but I also knew that cornered animals are the most dangerous. And Karen especially wasn't the type to go down without a vicious last strike. The question was, what would she try next, and would I be ready when she did? The first step of my plan was subtle. I didn't go charging in with chains or gates right away, because that would give them a chance to regroup and paint me as the crazy neighbor who was out of control. Instead, I started with research. I spent days at the county courthouse digging through property laws and even consulted with a lawyer who specialized in land disputes. She confirmed what I already suspected. The HOA had absolutely no authority over my road. The deed was ironclad. Their so-called vote had no legal standing, and if they kept trying to enforce rules over my property, they were opening themselves up to serious liability. The best part was her suggestion. She leaned across her desk and said, "If they're using your road without permission, you can legally restrict access and tow any vehicles that trespass. Just make sure you give notice first." I walked out of that office with a copy of the law highlighted and a grin plastered on my face. Because suddenly the balance of power had shifted. The HOA thought they were untouchable. I had just found the weapon that could bring them down. I typed up official-looking notices and delivered them to every board member, posting them at the entrance of the gravel road as well. It said in bold letters, "Private road trespassers will be towed at owner's expense, access restricted without written consent." I included the statute numbers and a copy of the deed, leaving no doubt that this was legal and enforceable. The reaction was almost immediate. The very next day, I caught Karen ripping one of the notices down while muttering to herself about defiance and community standards. Richard came pounding on my door demanding that I stop harassing the HOA, but I just smiled and told him to read the law. The look on his face when I said your vehicles are now trespassing every time you drive on my road was priceless. But I didn't stop there, because I knew they wouldn't take me seriously until I actually acted. So that weekend I arranged for a local towing company to be on standby. I explained the situation, showed them the paperwork, and offered to pay cash up front if needed. The owner, a gruff old man named Hank, slapped me on the back and said, "Son, I've been waiting for a chance to stick it to one of these HOA tyrants. Just say the word, and we'll clear that road for you." With Hank ready to roll, I set up my trap. Monday morning came, and as expected, the HOA members lined the road. With their cars, they always parked there during their so-called board inspections to walk around the neighborhood and hand out violations. This time, there were 8 cars total, shiny SUVs, sedans, even a little luxury convertible that Karen loved to flaunt. I waited until they were halfway through their rounds before making the call. Within 20 minutes, Hank and 2 of his trucks were rumbling down the highway, pulling onto my gravel road with flashing lights. The sound alone drew neighbors to their porches. Everyone craned their necks as Hank and his crew went to work. Hooking up the first car, Richard's silver SUV, the man came sprinting back, red-faced and shouting, "You can't do this. This is HOA property." Hank just pointed to the posted sign and replied, "Says here it's private. Owner gave us the green light. So unless you got a court order, this car is coming with me." Richard nearly tripped over his own feet, trying to block the truck, but Hank was a pro. Within minutes, the SUV was on the back of the flatbed. Neighbors gasped. Some even clapped quietly. Karen came running up next, shrieking about lawsuits, calling the police on her cell phone, but it didn't matter. One by one, every single HOA vehicle was hooked, lifted, and hauled away down the road. The sight of Karen's beloved convertible being pulled onto the flatbed was the highlight of my week. She screamed so loud I swear birds flew from the trees by the time the police finally showed up. 6 cars were already gone, and 2 more were being strapped down. The officer stepped out, looked at my paperwork, looked at the signs, and then at Karen, who was still waving her clipboard like it meant something, and he just shook his head. "Ma'am, it looks like you're trespassing on private property. There's nothing I can do." The color drained from Karen's face. For once she was speechless. The officer even gave me a nod and said, "You're within your rights. Just make sure they know how to get their vehicles back," and with that, he left, leaving Karen and Richard standing there, dumbfounded, as their precious cars disappeared down the highway. The neighborhood was buzzing for days after that. People whispered about how I had pulled it off. Some even came up to thank me, saying, "It was about time someone stood up to the HOA." But I knew this was just the beginning, because the board wasn't going to let this humiliation slide, and I wasn't about to back down now that I had the upper hand. I had proven that the road was mine, and I had the power to vanish every one of their cars, and if they thought I was done, they were about to learn just how far I was willing to go. After the county investigators made their presence known, and the neighborhood began to turn against Karen and her allies, things didn't settle into peace the way I hoped. If anything, the pressure seemed to drive the board into desperation, and desperate people are the most unpredictable. I could feel it in the way Richard's truck slowed whenever it passed my driveway late at night, headlights sweeping over my windows like a spotlight, or the way Karen stood on her porch with her clipboard, even though she no longer had authority. Just glaring at anyone who walked by, she wasn't just angry at being exposed. Yes, she was humiliated, and humiliation to someone like Karen is a wound that festers until it lashes out. I had won several battles, but I knew she still had poison left to spit. So I doubled down on preparation. I secured every piece of evidence I had, made multiple backups, gave copies to friends I trusted, kept a binder ready in case the fight escalated to court. Meanwhile, I started encouraging neighbors to share their own stories. Sworn statements, photos of ridiculous violation letters, records of fines they had paid under duress. Because the truth was, I wasn't the only one who had suffered. I was just the one willing to push back. By the time I was done, I had a mountain of proof, not just of their fraud with my road, but of years of intimidation against everyone around me. Then came the moment that changed everything. Karen called an emergency HOA meeting at the community center. She threatened that any homeowner who didn't attend would be fined. As if she still had the authority. When the night came, the hall was packed wall to wall, but not with frightened homeowners ready to bow to her. It was full of furious residents ready to demand answers. I sat in the back and watched as Karen strutted in with Richard and 2 others at her side. She tried to begin the meeting with her usual patronizing speech about order and property values, but this time people shouted back. They wanted to know about the money, about the fake invoices, about why the county had raided their office. Karen tried to talk over them, but the room erupted. Richard slammed a gavel so hard the handle snapped off, and the crowd only got louder. Then someone shouted, "Vote them out." And the dam broke. Hands shot into the air. Voices roared. And in a matter of minutes, Karen and her board were officially voted out of power. They tried to scream that it wasn't valid, that bylaws protected them, but no one was listening anymore. Their empire collapsed right there in front of everyone. Karen's face twisted with pure rage as she stormed out, Richard trailing after her, their allies silent and pale. I thought maybe it was over. Maybe the neighborhood could finally breathe. But I underestimated just how far they would go to cling to whatever scraps of control they thought they had. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of scratching outside and found my car keyed from bumper to bumper. Deep gouges carved into the paint. I checked my cameras, and though the footage was grainy, the figure was unmistakable. Karen herself, hunched and sneering as she dragged her keys across the metal. I filed a police report, but she denied it, acting offended anyone would accuse her. The cops said the video wasn't clear enough for charges. The next day, Richard parked his truck across my driveway, and refused to move, arms crossed, like some outlaw daring me to act. I called the police again, and when the officer arrived, Richard ranted about how the neighborhood was his. But the officer just ticketed him and told him to move. I saw in Richard's eyes the flicker of fear, because for once his bluster wasn't working. I realized then that their days of intimidating people were numbered. But I also realized I didn't want to wait around for their next tantrum. So I set my plan into motion, a plan I'd been quietly building for weeks. It wasn't about vandalism or revenge. It was about using the very same system they had once used to torment others. Except now it would turn on them, with the help of a few neighbors who were tired of being pushed around. I documented every violation their vehicles had committed: illegal parking, expired registration, blocking fire lanes. Things they thought they could get away with because they controlled the HOA. Except now, they had no shield, no authority, no one to pull strings for them. I filed every report, made every call, and within days the tow trucks came, one after another. Karen's Lexus, Richard's truck. The SUVs of the other board members all vanished in the night, hauled away legally by companies that had every right to take them. When the sun rose the next morning, the driveways that once held their pride and joy were empty. Neighbors gathered in little knots whispering, some laughing, others shaking their heads in disbelief. People speculated endlessly. Was it karma? Was it me? Was it just coincidence? But no one knew for sure, and I never said a word. I just walked out onto my porch, coffee in hand, watching Karen scream into her phone while Richard kicked at the gravel in frustration. And for the first time in months, I felt peace wash over me, because it was poetic. It was perfect. The people who had tried to steal my road without asking had finally lost the one thing they valued most: their shiny cars, their symbols of control. Their ability to patrol and intimidate, gone overnight, leaving them powerless, exposed, and exactly where they deserved to be. The morning after their vehicles were towed, the neighborhood buzzed like a hive shaken from sleep. Karen stomped up and down the cul-de-sac, in slippers and a bathrobe. Her phone glued to her ear, she screamed at anyone who would listen. Richard marched beside her, red-faced and muttering curses under his breath. Their allies were no better. One woman sat on her porch sobbing because her SUV had been taken. Another tried to wave papers in the air claiming it was all illegal, but the truth was simple. None of them had followed the rules they once enforced on everyone else. They had parked in fire lanes, left expired tags on their cars, blocked mailboxes, in driveways, and now that the HOA shield was gone, the law treated them like anyone else. For once they couldn't bend the system, and for once they couldn't hide behind their titles. What struck me most was how quickly the neighborhood atmosphere shifted. People who had been quiet for years suddenly found their voices. Laughter echoed as folks swapped stories of Karen's past harassment. Parents let their kids ride bikes freely again without worrying about Karen writing fines for chalk drawings. One man even hung a sign from his porch that read "Karen Free Zone" in bright letters. And though I didn't contribute openly, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. But peace was fragile, because Karen wasn't the kind to let go. And, sure enough, she escalated. First, she tried to file complaints with the county, claiming the tow trucks had acted illegally. But when investigators pulled the records and showed her each violation, she had no ground to stand on. Then she tried to rally her dwindling supporters. But the majority of homeowners were done listening. Finally, she turned her fury directly toward me. Late one night, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching under tires. I peeked through the blinds and saw Richard idling at the edge of my driveway, headlights off, just sitting there like a predator waiting. I called the sheriff's office, but by the time a deputy arrived, the truck was gone. It became a pattern. Every night for a week, he circled my street, sometimes stopping, sometimes just passing by. It was intimidation, plain and simple, I documented. Every incident, camera footage, timestamps, license plates. And when I brought it to the authorities, they didn't dismiss it. They told me harassment charges could be filed if it continued. That knowledge gave me leverage, but it also hardened my resolve. I realized Karen and Richard's obsession wasn't just about control anymore. It was personal. They needed someone, to blame for their downfall, someone to punish, and I was the symbol of their failure. I began moving more carefully, double-checking locks, keeping my evidence secure, even warning my neighbors to watch out, because if they couldn't hurt me directly, they might lash out at someone else. Sure enough, a week later, eggs splattered against the side of my house, yolk dripping down the windows in the morning sun. My mailbox was smashed with a bat the very next night. I cleaned it up and replaced it without comment, never giving them the satisfaction of a reaction, but I filed every report, kept every photo, built a case brick by brick. Then came the breaking point. One evening, as I was walking back from a neighbor's barbecue, Karen confronted me in the street, her face twisted with rage. She jabbed her finger into my chest and shouted that I had ruined her life, that I had destroyed everything she had built, that she would make sure I regretted ever moving into the neighborhood. Her voice echoed down the street and drew a crowd of neighbors. People watched silently, recording on their phones. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told her that her power was gone, that she couldn't bully or intimidate anyone anymore, and that the law was watching her every move. She screeched like a cornered animal, cursing me and threatening lawsuits. But the more she yelled, the clearer it became to everyone present that she was unraveling. The woman who once strutted around with absolute authority was now reduced to a spectacle, a warning of what happens when power consumes someone. And the neighborhood that once feared her no longer cared. They turned away, shaking their heads, muttering about how pathetic it had become. I walked back to my house without another word, but inside I felt the shift. Karen had reached the end of her rope. The only thing left was to see how far she would fall before the final snap. And I intended to be ready when it happened, because if this war had taught me anything, it was that justice doesn't come easy. It has to be fought for tooth and nail, till the people who think they can take whatever they want finally learn there's always a price to pay. Life in the neighborhood slowly shifted into something I hadn't experienced since the day I first moved in. Peace. Real peace. The kind of quiet where you could hear kids laughing in the cul-de-sacs again. Where people waved from porches instead of ducking behind curtains. Where barbecues popped up on weekends and neighbors actually trusted each other. The interim committee worked hard to rebuild transparency and undo the damage Karen and her board had inflicted. They lowered fees, refunded some of the bogus fines, and even started community projects like fixing sidewalks and planting trees. The irony was that, without the constant harassment, property values actually began to rise, proving everything Karen had ever screamed about protecting values was a hollow lie. But though things improved, the shadow of Karen still lingered. She remained in her house, no longer feared but pitied, pacing her porch some mornings, sometimes yelling at passing cars, sometimes muttering about how she'd get it all back. Occasionally, she'd try to stir up trouble, leaving passive-aggressive flyers in mailboxes, claiming the new committee was illegitimate, or writing rants online under fake names. But no one listened anymore. She had become background noise. The neighborhood had moved on. I should have felt only relief, but there was a strange emptiness too. After months of battle, the quiet almost felt unreal, like waiting for another shoe to drop. Still, I reminded myself that I had accomplished what needed to be done. I had protected my road, dismantled a corrupt board, and helped free an entire community from fear. But there was one image that stuck with me most of all: the look on Karen's face that morning when she realized every board member's car, including her precious Lexus, had vanished. It wasn't just shock. It was the realization that she had lost everything she used to control people: her authority, her intimidation, her illusion of power, gone in one night. And though people speculated endlessly about how it happened, whether it was karma, fate, or something I had arranged, I never confirmed a thing. I just let the silence hang there, because the truth is, some victories are best left a mystery, as weeks turned into months. I finally began to live normally again, going on walks with my wife, repairing my car that had been keyed, hosting neighbors for cookouts. It was like rediscovering what community was supposed to feel like, and yet deep down, I knew stories like mine weren't unique. Across the country, HOAs run by petty tyrants were tormenting families, twisting rules and abusing power. Karen was just one face of a much bigger problem. And while I was grateful, my story ended in justice. I couldn't shake the thought that others might not be so lucky. So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt trapped by someone abusing authority, remember this: bullies only win when people stay silent, when you stand up, when you fight back with truth and persistence. Their power crumbles faster than you think. I never asked for this war, but I'm glad I fought it, because in the end, the road that Karen tried to steal became a symbol of something bigger. It was proof that no one, not even an HOA Karen with a clipboard and an ego the size of a mountain, could take what was mine without facing consequences. And though the battle is over, the story isn't finished. Because somewhere right now, another Karen is plotting her next power trip, and another neighbor is wondering if they're strong enough to fight back. And my answer is simply are. And when you do, you'll discover something incredible: that justice doesn't just punish the guilty, it frees the innocent. So don't forget to stand tall, don't forget to speak out, and most importantly, don't forget to come back here for more stories like this, because this is just one of many, and the next one might be even more unbelievable than this. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to Sham Stories right now, because trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.